The sound that finally broke me wasn't a shout. It wasn't the shattering of a plate or the slam of a door. It was the gentle, almost imperceptible clink of a wine bottle against the rim of a crystal glass, a sound that stopped before it could finish. I was holding the bottle, a deep, blood-red Cabernet, its neck cool and solid in my hand. The candlelight from the center of our dining table caught the liquid as I tilted it, turning it into a liquid jewel suspended in motion. My husband Grant had just said something. His brother Andre, who was sitting across from him, had just laughed. It wasn't a big laugh, more of a choked snort of masculine agreement. And in the space between his words and his brother's laugh, the world went quiet. The hum of the sub-zero refrigerator, a sound that was the constant, low-grade pulse of our home, suddenly seemed deafening. The bottle in my hand felt impossibly heavy, an anchor holding me in a moment that had already stretched into an eternity. His sentence was finished, but it was still hanging in the air, thick and toxic, coating everything in the room with a fine, invisible dust of contempt. My name is Marisol. I am 35 years old. Grant was 39. We had been married for 7 years, together for 9. Long enough in my profession for a commercial property to have gone through its initial lease-up period, weathered a market downturn, and begun to show signs of needing significant capital improvements. I'm a commercial real estate broker. I spend my days analyzing assets and liabilities, calculating cap rates, and understanding the deep, structural truths of a building that a coat of paint can't hide. I know what makes a property valuable: strong fundamentals, reliable tenancy, and a clear understanding of its place in the market. For years, I had treated our marriage as my primary asset, a blue-chip holding I was committed to for the long term. I believed in its fundamentals. I believed in its potential for appreciation. I failed to notice that I had become the sole tenant, the property manager, and the entire maintenance crew, all while paying rent to a landlord who had long since stopped reinvesting in the structure. The moment it all became clear, the moment I finally read the fine print of our partnership, was a Wednesday night. It was one of Grant's typical investor dinners, though smaller this time. Just his younger brother, Andre, who was considering a small seed investment in Grant's perpetually nascent tech startup. The table was set with the wedding china we never used, the heavy silver that felt cold and serious in your hand. I had orchestrated the entire evening, as always. I'd sourced a private chef who specialized in New Southern cuisine, selected the wine pairings, and prepped Grant with a full dossier on Andre's recent financial successes and anxieties. My role, as it always was on these nights, was to be the silent, smiling symbol of Grant's stability. I was the beautifully maintained lobby of his ambitious and largely unfunded skyscraper project. The conversation had turned to risk and reward, to what men like them had to give up to get ahead. Andre was complaining about a recent breakup, the cost of it, the drama. Grant, swirling his wine, leaned back in his chair with the easy confidence of a man who has never had to check the price of anything because someone else was always picking up the tab. "You've got to protect the infrastructure," Grant said, his voice full of sage, borrowed wisdom. He gestured around the dining room, at the art on the walls that I had sourced from a gallery in Noda, at the custom light fixture I had waited 6 months for. "The assets, the lifestyle." Andre sighed. "Yeah, but a wife, man. She wants half." Grant let out a short, dismissive laugh. He looked at his brother, not at me, even though I was standing right beside him, refilling his glass. It was then he said it. The words slipped out so easily, so casually, nestled between a bite of short rib and a sip of Cabernet. "Honestly," he said, chewing thoughtfully, "wives are replaceable. The lifestyle isn't." He delivered the line as if it were a stock tip, a piece of undeniable market analysis. Andre barked out that laugh, a sound of relieved recognition, and I stood there, the neck of the bottle in my hand, the wine frozen mid-pour. I didn't drop it. I didn't gasp. My body went perfectly, unnaturally still. It was the stillness of a building just before a controlled demolition, when all the charges have been set and the countdown has reached 0. In that silence, I felt 7 years of my life collapse into a pile of dust. He hadn't just insulted me. He had appraised me. He had assessed my value, found it negligible, and declared me a depreciating asset he could easily liquidate and replace. And he had done it at his own table, in front of his family, while I was serving him. The archaeology of our marriage began that night, but the foundations had been cracking for years. I just hadn't wanted to pay for the inspection. Disrespect isn't a landslide, it's an erosion. A slow, patient wearing away of the soil until the whole cliff face gives way. In the beginning, my competence was something he celebrated. He would boast about me at parties, at these same investor dinners. "My wife closes harder than my associates, she'll tell you," he'd say, clapping a hand on my back while I smiled demurely. I remember one dinner, about 4 years ago, with a venture capitalist from Atlanta. I was wearing a navy blue sheath dress that had cost a significant portion of a commission check. I had spent the entire day briefing Grant, creating flashcards with the investor's key portfolio companies, his recent exits, even the name of his daughter's boarding school. During dinner, Grant was flawless. He was charming, knowledgeable, visionary. The investor was impressed. As the man was leaving, he shook my hand. "Your husband is a force of nature," he said. "But you, my dear, are the one who makes the weather." I glowed. I thought it was a compliment to us, to our partnership. Grant beamed, pulling me into his side. Later that night, as we were getting ready for bed, he kissed me and said, "We killed it tonight. You were perfect." I heard it as we. I heard it as a team victory. Now, replaying that scene in the silence of my mind, I hear it for what it was, a performance review. I wasn't his partner. I was his top-performing, unpaid senior associate, in charge of special projects and investor relations. My value wasn't in who I was, but in the function I performed. I made him look good. I made him seem credible. I was the due diligence that made a risky investment look like a sure thing. The erosion was financial too. Quietly, and then all at once. In year 3 of our marriage, his startup hit a wall. His angel funding was running dry, and the next round was still months away from closing. He came to me one evening, his face drawn and pale. He smelled of fear, that metallic scent of panic that clings to a man used to easy wins. He told me he was going to miss payroll for his 3 employees. It was a Thursday. Payroll was due Friday. "I can't do it, Mari," he said, his voice thin. "If I miss payroll, they'll walk. The company is over before it even starts." I looked at him, at this man I had promised to support. I had just closed a major deal on a multi-tenant office building in Ballantyne. The commission check had cleared that afternoon. It was substantial, enough to cover his entire quarterly payroll, with plenty left over. It was also earmarked for us, for a down payment on a bigger house, for a real vacation, for topping off my retirement accounts. My own broker was taking the top performers on a trip to Cabo the following month. I had already picked out a new bathing suit. "How much do you need?" I asked. He told me. It was a breathtaking number. He didn't ask, not directly. He just presented the problem, creating a vacuum that he knew my competence and my love for him would rush to fill. I spent the next hour on my laptop, initiating a wire transfer from my savings account to his business account. The click of the mouse was quiet, but the finality of it felt like a gunshot. The next day, I called my broker and told her I wouldn't be able to make the Cabo trip. I made up an excuse about a family commitment. She was disappointed, but understood. Grant made payroll. His employees stayed. 2 weeks later, he sent out an update to his investors. I saw the email because he accidentally copied me on it. "It was a tight quarter," he wrote. "But through disciplined financial management and strategic foresight, we weathered the storm and are now poised for exponential growth." He didn't mention me. He didn't mention my commission check. He didn't mention the vacation I gave up. He had taken my sacrifice and rebranded it as his own strategic genius. I had provided the capital, and he had written his name on the building. I remember reading the email and feeling a cold knot in my stomach. I told myself it was for the best. He needed to project strength and confidence. Our finances were intertwined after all. His success was my success. It was the lie that hardworking women have told themselves for centuries. I was investing in our future. But I wasn't an investor. I was a bailout. And bailouts are never paid back. They're just absorbed into the balance sheet and forgotten. The investor dinners became the primary theater for our dynamic. They happened once a quarter. My life would grind to a halt for a week in preparation. It was my job to curate the guest list, to manage the RSVPs, to liaise with the caterers, to select the wine, to stage the house until it looked less like a home and more like a feature in an architecture magazine. Grant would parachute in for the main event. He'd review the guest bios I'd prepared, memorize a few key facts, and then hold court while I circulated, making sure every glass was full, every plate was cleared, and every conversation was flowing smoothly. I was the silent producer of his one-man show. I remember one dinner vividly. A potential lead investor was there, a woman named Eleanor Vance, who was notoriously difficult to impress. She ran a boutique private equity firm and had a reputation for shredding unprepared founders. I knew that she was a serious collector of contemporary Southern art and that her daughter was an equestrian. So I swapped our usual abstract painting in the dining room for a piece by a Charlotte-based artist I admired, a beautiful, moody landscape of the Blue Ridge Mountains. During a lull in the conversation, I quietly mentioned the upcoming horse trials at the Tryon International Equestrian Center, knowing her daughter would be competing. Eleanor's eyes lit up. The conversation shifted from term sheets and user acquisition costs to something human, something real. She and I spoke for 10 minutes about the discipline and artistry of dressage. Grant stood beside me, nodding along, adding nothing. But he positioned himself so that he was at the center of the conversation, a host graciously allowing his wife a moment to contribute her charming, domestic knowledge. Later, after Eleanor left, clearly impressed, Grant was ecstatic. "That horse thing was brilliant, babe. Absolutely brilliant. You really know how to work a room." He thought he was praising me, but what I heard was the language of utility. I hadn't connected with another person. I had executed a strategic maneuver. I hadn't shared a passion. I had worked a room. My personality, my interests, my knowledge, they weren't parts of me to be cherished. They were tools in his toolbox, to be deployed in service of his ambition. He saw my life as a collection of resources for his consumption. My salary was his runway. My home was his boardroom. My social grace was his networking strategy. And me? I was just the person who managed it all. Replaceable. The final piece of the archaeology clicked into place on that Wednesday night, standing by the table with the wine bottle in my hand. After Andre's laugh died out, there was a beat of silence. Grant must have seen something in my face, some flicker of the inferno that had just ignited inside me. "What?" he said, a little defensively. "It's a joke, Mari. Lighten up." "Babe, poor Andre another," he added, dismissing me with a flick of his wrist. "He's family." I didn't say anything. I moved like an automaton. I filled Andre's glass. I walked back to the kitchen, placed the bottle on the granite countertop, and gripped the edge of the sink. My knuckles were white. I stared out the window into the dark backyard. I could see my own reflection, a ghostly outline against the black glass. The woman in the window looked tired. She looked like the chief operating officer of a company she didn't own on the day she finally realized she had no equity. In real estate, we call it a walkaway. It's when you do your final inspection on a property you're under contract to buy and you find a fatal flaw, a cracked foundation, a collapsed load-bearing wall, something unfixable that wasn't on the initial disclosure. It doesn't matter how beautiful the staging is or how great the curb appeal is. A smart buyer knows you don't argue, you don't negotiate, you don't try to fix it. You just sign the termination notice and walk away. Grant's words weren't just a joke. They were the structural engineer's report telling me the foundation of our marriage was condemned. And in that moment, I terminated the contract. The next morning, Thursday, was a study in deliberate normalcy. I got up at the same time. I made coffee. Grant came into the kitchen, stretching, acting as if nothing had happened. He wrapped his arms around my waist from behind as I stood at the counter. "Morning," he murmured into my hair. I didn't flinch. I didn't pull away. I just stood there, a statue of a wife. "Morning," I said, my voice even. "Hey," he started, turning me around to face him. His face was a mask of strained sincerity. "About last night. I'm sorry if I, offended you. Andre and I were just riffing." "I know," I said. "You're being dramatic, he said, a slight edge creeping into his voice when he saw my calm wasn't turning into forgiveness. "Andre knew it was a joke." "Okay," I said. I took a sip of my coffee. He was expecting a fight. He was prepared for tears, for accusations, for a dramatic scene that he could then manage and dismiss. He was not prepared for my stillness. My composure unnerved him. It was a language he didn't speak. He thought my silence was acceptance. It was not. It was due diligence. At 9 a.m., I was in my office. I closed the door, something I rarely did. My first call was not to a client. It was to Catherine Beale, the sharpest divorce attorney in Charlotte. She had been a client of mine 2 years prior. I'd found her firm a new office space in a sleek glass tower uptown. "Marisol," she said, her voice warm but efficient. "What can I do for you? Looking to expand already?" "Of a different sort, Catherine," I said. "I need to retain you. Personally." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a brief one. Catherine was a professional. She heard the unspoken things. "I have an opening at 11 tomorrow morning," she said. "Does that work?" "Perfectly," I said. The next 24 hours were an exercise in performance. I went about my work. I took calls. I reviewed lease agreements. I was a model of efficiency. That evening, Grant came home in a buoyant mood, the minor unpleasantness of the previous night already forgotten. He brought home takeout from our favorite Thai place. "I was thinking," he said, as we sat at the kitchen island, "we should take that trip to Italy this year. For real, you've been wanting to go." He was offering me a trip funded by the money I had given him to save his company. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. He was trying to buy back my affection with my own money. It was the emotional equivalent of a leveraged buyout. "That sounds nice," I said, pushing green curry around my plate. Inside, I was calculating. I was planning. A logistician preparing a complex shipment. The asset was me. The destination was my own life. Friday morning, at 11 sharp, I was sitting in Catherine's office. It was on the 23rd floor, with a panoramic view of the city I knew so well. I could see the building where I'd made my first $1 million sale. I could see the neighborhood where Grant and I had lived in our first apartment. It all looked so small and manageable from up here. Catherine's office was minimalist and calm. She listened without interruption as I laid out the facts. The 7 years, the financial contributions, the investor dinners, the final casual sentence that had detonated it all. I did not cry. I presented the information as if I were briefing her on a new listing. These are the property's features. This is the ownership history. This is the reason for the sale. My signature on the retainer agreement was firm. I used the same black fountain pen I used to sign closing documents, a heavy, expensive instrument that felt balanced and decisive in my hand. My hand didn't shake. I'd signed bigger, more complex deals than this marriage by lunch most weeks. "He'll be served Monday morning," Catherine said, her expression a mixture of professional sympathy and steel. "We'll file for an equal division of assets, and I'll be petitioning for reimbursement of all personal funds transferred to his LLC." "No," I said quietly. Catherine paused, her pen hovering over a notepad. "No. Don't serve him," I said. "Just draft the petition for dissolution. Standard separation agreement. I'll give it to him myself." I thought for a moment. "And don't worry about the money I gave him. Consider it a bad investment. I'm liquidating my position and moving on. I just want it to be clean." She looked at me, a long, appraising look. I knew what she saw. She didn't see a victim. She saw a peer. She saw a woman who understood that sometimes the best way to win is to refuse to play the other person's game. She nodded slowly. "I'll have a messenger bring the documents to your office by 4 p.m. The manila envelope felt cool and heavy in my briefcase. It sat beside my laptop all afternoon, a quiet bomb. At 6 p.m., I went home. Grant was already there, on the couch with his laptop open, a beer sweating on the coaster beside him. "Hey you," he said, not looking up. "Long day?" "The usual," I said. I went into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter, watching him. He was completely oblivious. He was comfortable in his habitat, a creature unaware that the ecosystem that sustained him was about to vanish. He thought our life was a fortress he had built. He never realized I was the foundation, the walls, the roof, and the electrical grid, and I was about to turn the power off. The exit was quiet. He went out Saturday morning to meet Andre for golf. The moment his car pulled out of the driveway, I began to move. There was no rage, no frantic energy. My movements were calm, methodical, and efficient. It was a move out, not a flight. I had called a high-end moving service on Friday afternoon, the kind used by executives for discreet relocations. They arrived in an unmarked truck at precisely 9 a.m. I directed them with the quiet authority of a project manager. My clothes, my books, the art I had purchased, the desk from my home office, the Peloton he never used. They worked quickly, wrapping furniture in thick gray blankets, packing boxes with silent precision. I moved through the house, a ghost in my own life, taking inventory of what was mine and what was merely ours. The distinction, I found, was clearer than I had ever imagined. So much of what had felt like us was actually me. By 11 a.m., my entire life was in the back of that truck. The movers left. I stood in the strangely empty living room. The walls were bare where the paintings used to be. The bookshelves gaped open like mouths, their contents gone. The silence was different now. It wasn't the tense, humming silence of Wednesday night. It was a clean, expansive silence. The silence of a blank page. The silence of an empty office space ready for a new tenant. My last act was to walk into our bedroom. His side of the bed was still unmade from the morning. I smoothed the duvet, pulling it taut. Then I took the manila envelope from my purse. His name, Grant Collier, was printed on a clean white label, perfectly centered. I placed it squarely on his pillow. It lay there, stark and official against the soft gray linen. A final, non-negotiable term sheet. I walked out of the house without looking back. I didn't leave a note. The envelope was the note. I got into my car and drove downtown. I checked into a suite at the Westin, the kind with floor-to-ceiling windows. As I stood looking out over the city, my phone began to light up. It was on the marble-topped desk, buzzing against the wood. Grant's name on the screen, then again and again. A text message appeared. "Where are you?" Another. "What the hell is going on? Half your stuff is gone." And another. "Marisol, answer your phone." I watched the phone buzz, a frantic, distant insect. I felt nothing. No panic, no grief, just a tailored, unbothered calm. My signature was already on the papers. The deal was done. The escalation cascade began, as I knew it would. It followed a predictable pattern, like a market correction. First came the shock and denial, the flurry of calls and texts I had already witnessed. I let them all go to voicemail. I ordered room service, took a long bath, and slept for 10 uninterrupted hours in the middle of a vast, empty king-sized bed. The next stage, anger and accusation, arrived Sunday afternoon in the form of a long, rambling voicemail. His voice was tight with fury. I was dramatic. I was impulsive. I was manipulative. How could I do this? After everything he'd done for us. He was trying to reframe the narrative, to cast me as the unstable one, the one who had inexplicably destroyed a perfectly good thing. He was curating his story for an unseen audience of his own conscience. By Monday, he had moved on to recruiting allies. My phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Marisol, dear, Grant is so worried. Please call him. Whatever this is, you two can work it out." I typed back a polite, firm response. "Thank you for your concern, Joanne. This is between Grant and me." I knew he had fed her a carefully edited version of events, one in which he was the baffled, wounded husband. Negotiation and false remorse came on Tuesday. He called me from a number I didn't recognize. I answered out of professional habit. "Murray," he said, his voice thick with a performance of contrition. "Please, just talk to me. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. I can change. I know I haven't been present. I've been so focused on the company. It's for us, baby. It's all for us." The offer was arriving, as it always does, only after he had lost access. It was the desperate landlord offering 3 months of free rent on a building that had already been condemned. "The time to be present was last Wednesday, Grant," I said, my voice even. "The time to invest in us was 3 years ago when you cashed my commission check." There was a stunned silence. He wasn't used to me keeping receipts. Finally, we reached the last stage, raw vulnerability. It happened on Wednesday, exactly 1 week after the dinner. He called again, and this time the anger and the performance were gone. His voice was just empty. "I don't understand," he said, and for the first time I believe he was telling the truth. He genuinely didn't. It was one stupid sentence, a joke. My brother was there, we were just talking trash like guys do. It wasn't a joke, Grant. It was a valuation, I said. What? You appraised me, and you found me wanting. Then came the line I knew was buried under all the rest of it, the foundational truth of his character, delivered in a moment of pure, pathetic honesty. I was being hypothetical, he cried, his voice cracking. You took a man's joke and burned a marriage down. He still saw it as my action, my overreaction, my failure to understand the rules of a game I had never agreed to play. He believed the marriage was a solid structure that I had set on fire. He couldn't see that it was a hollowed-out facade, and I had simply stopped holding it up. I took a deep breath. It was time for the final mic drop, a redefinition. I didn't burn it down, Grant, I said, and my voice was not unkind, just clear, like a bell ringing in an empty room. I just stopped being the load-bearing wall. I hung up the phone, and that was the end of it. Vindication is not a fiery, triumphant thing. It's quiet. It's the absence of noise. It's the color of a Monday morning sky when you are driving to a job you love, in a city you know like the back of your hand. My rebuilding began not in a therapist's office, but in my own element, the world of commercial real estate. While Grant was cycling through his stages of grief, I was cycling through property listings. The money I had refused to fight for from his company, the commissions I had earned, the funds I had so carefully invested over the years, they were not just numbers in an account. They were potential. They were leverage. 2 weeks after I left, I found a building. A small 3-story commercial property in South End, a neighborhood buzzing with new life. It was undervalued, poorly managed, but its bones were good. The fundamentals were strong. I spent a week doing nothing but due diligence. I ran the numbers. I studied the market. I walked every square foot of the property myself. It had potential that no one else had seen. On the following Monday, I put in an offer, not as a broker for a client, as the principal, as the buyer. My offer was accepted. The closing was the smoothest I've ever been a part of. When I signed the final documents with that same black fountain pen, I felt a sense of peace that was so profound, it was almost physical. I hadn't just bought a building. I had bought back my own name. 6 months later, the renovations were complete. My new office was on the top floor, a corner suite with glass walls that looked out over the Charlotte skyline. The tenant spaces below were already fully leased. I had a small, brilliant team. My name was on the glass door in clean silver letters, Marisol Reed and Partners. Reed. My name. I was sitting at my new desk, a massive slab of reclaimed wood, looking over a new set of architectural plans. My assistant had brought me a coffee an hour ago. It was getting cold. I was too busy to drink it, too engaged, too focused on what I was building. This was peace. Not the passive peace of a quiet home, but the active peace of a life fully engaged, a mind fully utilized, a future being built on a foundation of my own making. I saw him once, about a year after I left. It was at an industry awards dinner. I was there to accept an award for a complex deal I had structured. He was there as someone's guest. I saw him across the crowded ballroom. He looked ordinary, smaller than I remembered. The larger-than-life confidence was gone, replaced by a kind of weary caution. I heard through the grapevine that his company had finally folded. Without my capital infusions and the credibility my presence provided, his vision was just an unfunded liability. Our eyes met for a moment. He gave a small, hesitant nod. I nodded back, a brief, civil acknowledgement. There was no anger, no bitterness. There was no feeling at all. It was like seeing a property you considered acquiring years ago and feeling a quiet relief that you decided to pass on the deal. He was just a man in a room, a line item from a previous fiscal year that had already been closed out. In commercial real estate, there's a concept called the highest and best use. It's the idea that a property should be used in the way that produces the greatest value. For years, I miscalculated the highest and best use of myself. I thought it was to be the silent, supportive infrastructure for someone else's dream. I poured my resources, my money, my time, my intelligence into a project that was fundamentally unsound. Leaving Grant wasn't an act of destruction. It was an act of redevelopment. It was a rezoning of my own life. I learned that you can't build a skyscraper on a faulty foundation, and you can't build a partnership with someone who sees you as a line item that can be easily replaced. Love is not about utility. It's not about what a person can do for you. True value is inherent. It doesn't need to be justified or performed. It simply is. The tragedy wasn't that he said I was replaceable. It was that I had spent 7 years of my life trying to prove that I wasn't. You don't have to demonstrate your value to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You just have to sign the papers, walk away, and find a property worthy of your investment. The best ones I've found are the ones you own yourself. My name is on the door now, and I am home. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.